this is a special event in the series. We're celebrating the publication of the book, The Guide to More Nebraska Authors, edited by Charlene Neely and Gerry Cox, illustrated by Heidi Hermanson. And we're also celebrating the launch of the website, nebraskaauthors.org. I want to thank a few people before I introduce the authors and tell you a little bit about how the website started. The website has been the product of collecting information on Nebraska authors for more than 50 years. We've had volunteers in the Heritage Room who've been clipping newspapers to provide information for what we called the Nebraska Author Information Link. They called it the NAIL file for short, which is a pretty cutesy name. so we changed that to Nebraska Authors. That was created as a means to aggregate information on Nebraska authors, to collect it all in one central location, and then to eventually make it available to everyone. But up until just this last week, it was only available in the Heritage Room, in our internal database, and on the website that we were working on. And so about 2 years ago, Kathryn Walter from the University of Nebraska Center for Digital Research in the Humanities she's a former Nebraska Literary Heritage Association board member and former president, so she's familiar with the collection. And she came to the Heritage Room looking for information. She was collaborating with the state poet, Twyla Hansen, who's also here. Hello, Twyla. They were collaborating to create the Poetry from the Plains website, and thought the Nebraska Author Information Link would be helpful. And Kay found it frustrating to search on her database, and also it wasn't being kept as current as it should have been. And so from that meeting, Kay generously offered the help of the Center for Digital Research in the Humanities to help us create a better database and better accessibility for the information that we've been collecting. And the product of that effort is the Nebraska Authors website, which you can see right here. There you go, that's the homepage. So first of all, I want to thank Kay for her enthusiasm for the project. And Pat Leach, the library director, my boss, Lincoln City Library's director, Pat Leach, who has been also very enthusiastic about the program and has generously given staff time and library resources to the project. So thank you very much. Also want to thank Karen Dalziel, web designer extraordinaire. This is her, everything you see is Karen's work, and we're so grateful for her help, for her staff. Let me just show you some features of the website while I'm talking. So these are the people we need to thank. This is Karen's staff. Jessica DeSalt, Greg Tunick, Kathryn Walter, and Laura Workley edited the text of the website. So thank you to all of you. And then the Lincoln Library staff who helped. We have some great editors. Steve Cloyd wrote a lot of the biographical information for most of the authors. Kim Jorgensen is our wonderful reference librarian. She's great at sleuthing all the dates that we needed, all the awards, all of the important vital information on each of the authors. And then Jeff Tangeman is our library cataloger, and he's a great detail guy, and he's the one who's making sure that everything looks as it should on the website. And then we've also had the help of our student volunteers and interns. Our volunteers are Amy Cow and Denise Chin, and our UNL student English interns last semester was Haley Fisher, and this semester we have Kelsey Conrad and Maggie Moore, and they've done quite a lot of work on the website as well. So thanks to everyone who contributed, and finally thanks to Humanities Nebraska. They provided a generous grant that allowed us to print the bookmarks and the posters that are on the table back here. Please take those and distribute them if you can. They provided the materials as well as the postage to deliver them to 330 libraries statewide. We're hoping to involve as many librarians and community members as we can, so we can have so that we can fully represent every author in the state to the best of our ability. And so to that end, they provided for that, and we're grateful for their support as well. So that's the website, and as our authors are speaking, I'll kind of keep an eye back here as well. I'll try and bring up their profiles, and then at the end I'll show you some of the things that you can search for on the website, time permitting if you can stay, and certainly take your questions as well. So now I would like to introduce our author speakers for today. Gerry Cox and Charlene Neely are the editors of the book Guide to More Nebraska Authors. This was a huge undertaking. The guides to More Nebraska Authors have a long history dating back to 1918 when the first guide was published. It was republished again in 1937. I have a couple of these books. I'll read some excerpts from them at the end. Some of these early books talk about how there's just not great, there are not a lot of Nebraska authors, but we're going to do our best to represent them. And as the book has been republished over the years, Gerry's comments are great that, we just can't possibly document every Nebraska author, but that they do their best. And so the Guide to More Nebraska Authors is an extension of the Centennial Edition, published in 1967. This is the Sesquicentennial Edition. It's one of the featured programs of the State Sesquicentennial. And this is an extension of the book that Gerry published with Carol McDaniels in 1998, and along with that publication was this beautiful literary map. And you can see the history of literary maps back here, and I hope Gerry will talk a little bit about those. So Gerry Cox is a longtime champion of Nebraska writers. She's been a member of the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association for many, many years. She won the Literary Heritage Award in 2007, and quite a lot of what we know on our database and just in the Heritage Room collection has come from Gerry's work. So we're thrilled to have her here and grateful for all of her contributions. Her co-editor, Charlene Neely, is a poet in her own right and also works to bring attention to Nebraska authors. She's a member of the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association as well and a member of the Nebraska Writers Guild. She was our honorary author member for the NLHA in 2015, 2016. And she also belongs to many writers' groups. You can see her work in the publications of the Chaparral Poets and quite a lot of other journals. So happy to have Charlene here as well. And then the illustrator of the Guide to More Nebraska Authors, Heidi Hermanson, at the end of the table here. And Heidi has participated in a number of initiatives to bring poetry to larger audiences. She organized the first Poetry Chautauqua at the Nebraska State Fair, and she's also involved in quite a lot of public art and art initiatives. And you'll be able to see some of her pictures projected when she's speaking. So these are the contributors to the book. And then we also have here Mary Kay Stillwell, one of the editors of our One Book, One Nebraska, which is Nebraska Presence, an anthology of poetry. And we'll hear her read as well. Before we start the readings, though, I'd like to invite Clark Coulterman up, and Clark is from NELAC, and he'll tell you he has a special presentation to make.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be here today. Gerry has been very involved with the Guide to Nebraska Authors. This is, like she said, it's her second book, and the minute the first one was printed, they started talking about doing a second one. That was back in '98, but it took a sesquicentennial to get it accomplished. And of course, she lost her one partner, and so she found another one just as strong and just as much a dynamo. And as a result, we're just honored that NELAC could be part of this today. Gerry is a longtime leader in our Nebraska English Teachers Association called the Nebraska English Language Arts Council, and she's held about every job, as many of you are probably aware of, that could be held in our association, and continually reported and gave updates monthly on the status of the book. And many of us became a little skeptical that it was ever going to happen, and she was confident that book was going to be published. And in this day and age when many things are digital, it's so nice to have a book, as a language arts teacher myself can confirm. But my job today is not to go on there. My job today is to thank these two wonderful ladies for their dedication and hard work. And a wise man once told me that if you say thank you, they may do it again. And so I'm sure they're already thinking of book 3, which will be an interesting challenge again. First of all, I'd like to recognize Charlene Neely. Now, Charlene is not a formal teacher as we know it. However, she is an educator and has taught poetry to many students in many programs. And so we'd like to recognize Charlene. Charlene, come on up here a second. Charlene, we're a poor English Teachers Association. We can't give you much, but you have everything you could possibly want. You have a book now. And so, what we can do is make you an honorary member of our organization. And the Nebraska English Arts Council recognizes and thanks Charlene Neely. NELAC is honored to name Charlene Neely an honorary member of the Nebraska English Language Arts Council. NELAC salutes her work with the recent book on Nebraska authors and appreciates her continued support of Nebraska literature. Congratulations and continued success. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then the other pillar of the book, what could we possibly give Gerry? You know, besides our thanks and heartfelt gratitude. At a recent board meeting, however, we did conclude that we are renaming. We have an award every year. It's called the Future Language Arts Teacher of the Year. It's for outstanding student teachers, and that now will become the Gerry Cox Future Teacher of the Year Award. Congratulations, Gerry. Thank you for allowing us to be here today and honor these two wonderful gals and keep selling books, right? Thank you.
All right, so the way this is going to go, we're going to hear from our readers first, and then we'll open the floor to any authors who are here, and then I think that'll allow us to see more of the profiles, and then after we've heard from readings from all of the authors, then we can do some demonstrations on some of the features that you guys would like to see. So I'm going to open the floor now and invite Charlene and Gerry to come up and talk about the book. Thank you.
I'm very happy to represent NELAC, the Nebraska English Language Arts Council. I'm very grateful. Thank you, Clark. Clark has been the driving force ever since he was skeptical about the book that we published in 1998. But we published the Nebraska literary map with the flowers before that, and it was successful, so he relented and we went ahead with the book. The Library of Congress asked states' English departments to send to the library literary maps representing the state. So at that time, we had the middle map, which was not as extensive as we wanted. So we enlarged it and used the flowers representing the Nebraska wildflowers representing the people from the areas. Fortunately, after all the time that passed between 1998 and today, I found Charlene Neely, a wonderful poet who delighted everyone to come and join me in this venture. And I do thank Charlene. She was the driving force for this book. Some of the things that we enjoyed doing this book, besides getting to know each other better, was to read what people said. And Lita Powell Drake accommodated us by telling us something about Dr. Morgan, who was responsible for bringing her into Nebraska and got her started with her career, and she's going strong today, thank goodness. And then there's Melissa Marsh, who is the recipient of the Nebraska History Award for her book, Nebraska POW Camps, A History of World War II Prisoners in the Heartland. She also received an award for an article in Nebraska History, Still the Old Marlene, Hollywood at the Fort Robinson Prisoner of War Camp. And yes, that was Marlene Dietrich. Now, Robert Polk is a stay-at-home dad who lives in Scotts Bluff. He grew up in Stapleton, taught high school in Kearney for 3 years, and was a school counselor in Bellevue West. He is a farmer, business owner, and tree climbing arborist. And he writes picture books under the name S.T. Mercy, but he didn't list them, so we don't know. We'll have to go on his website, and I don't have that with me. But his book is Operation Tree Roper, which I thought was rather interesting, and IEYE above. And for nature lovers, poet Amy Pletner lives in southeastern Nebraska on the native prairie, and that enhances every word she writes. And then there's Thomas Phillips. Thomas Phillips grew up on a farm near Lincoln, Nebraska, and resides in Lincoln. An early fascination with history and sports has influenced his writing about military history, national defense, and the sport of baseball. And he has many, many books, and was a top graduate from the Air Force Officer Training School, Squadron Officer School, and Air Command and Staff College. So we have a wide variety of people that are represented in our new book. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. It's a nice day out there, sort of, and we're not used to that lately, so I'm glad you came and stayed in here instead. It was sort of a scary thing. I'm a poet, and I always say I'm a poet because I have a short attention span. And Gerry approached me about doing this book, and I thought, oh. And after she got me to say yes, then she said it was sponsored by the NELAC, the English teachers. I'm sitting here going, I'm doing a book for the English teachers? And this is even scarier. But they have guided me through it, especially Gerry. She just was always there when I had a question, and we worked hard on it. We put out a little sheet that just asked for their the author's name, if they wrote under another name, where they lived, a little bio, their education, and then their publications. And it was sort of easy. I think we made over 2,000 of those sheets and handed them out everywhere. I never went anywhere without a stack in my purse. If I went to the book festival, I was handing them out. If I went to a Nebraska Writers Guild conference, I put them on the table and said, go take one. Everywhere we went, and we emailed them to different organizations and people and said, pass them along. And you know how that is? Getting writers to sit down and write about themselves, I think it's sort of like pulling teeth. Because I was surprised. We got over, almost 180 answers back, which is quite a good response, they tell me. And so then we just had to plug it all into the thing and format it. And then we had to go to Chris and Aaron at Infusion Media and do the hard work, because we had to set it up a certain way so they could do their work with it. And we sent them the pictures of Heidi's that we wanted to include, and they did a beautiful job. The cover picture they selected from the ones we submitted. Inside there are, most of them are about 1/4 of a page. You know how it is, it's always the page in between the two you can get. There's one that's a full page, and it's a beautiful picture, and it needed a full page. I'm going to let Heidi tell you where they're from and what they are about. I just think I'm glad we're done. Although now we have to market the book. And that's another thing. I met Gerry, I don't know how many years ago, at the Nebraska State Fair in the Writers Guild booth. She was there with the map, and I was there helping out. And we just became friends over the years. And she's been a good guider all these years. So, yeah, that's the other thing. I should write down what I'm going to talk about, but I'm a poet. I don't follow rules. We have an index of names, which is all the names of people out of state, you know, that they mentioned as their mentors. Like you mentioned the person that sent you to Nebraska, different writers, everything from famous people to people you'd never heard of, but they influenced them in some way, and it was fun to find out how. The other index we have is the index of places, which is every place in Nebraska, every town that the authors mentioned in their bios and in their writings. So we were able to index that so that if somebody is looking for an author to come and speak to their group or something, or to their school, they can look and say, oh, here's Oconto. And that's our area. And I'll go look at these pages and see who's available and what they write about. And that's our hope, that people will use it for a lot of different reasons. And to find out more about the authors in Nebraska. Because I swear, every day I meet someone I didn't know was an author. Some of them I've even known a long time and didn't know. So we hope you enjoy it, and we hope you enjoy the website that they have up, because it's going to tell you even more about some of them. And thank you.
Okay, well, I will just tell you that there's no magic involved in these photographs, although I'd like to think there was. But I'd like to tell you that I basically subscribe to 3 lines of Mary Oliver's, and that's pay attention, be astonished, tell others about it. So I think that's what informs my photography. And there's some astonishing things in Nebraska, it turns out. Who knew? So this is near Denton, Nebraska. It really is. And this is a Buddhist temple. And Charlene was with me when we found this, I believe, and they had just finished services, so we were able to go in and snoop a little bit, and it's very nice. But Denton, Nebraska, who knew? And curiously enough, there's a monastery just down the street from it. Okay, this is a fire escape on the Seward Courthouse in Seward, Nebraska. And Seward is known for being the 4th of July city. They have a big to-do and quilts and vendors. And what I did was I climbed up to the 3rd floor and sat on this and watched the whole thing from the 3rd floor. And nobody told me to get down. Nobody spoke to me, so it was great. I had my own little viewpoint, but the spiral staircase at the courthouse. And this is down Highway 183, which I think Stu Magnuson called the spine of Nebraska. It cuts straight down through Nebraska, and you can go for 3 hours and not see a person, maybe see one house, and then there's this little park. It's got a little bench, little bathroom, and a picnic table, and out in the middle of the sandhills. So that's the be sure. A word of advice, though, if you're going to take 183, fill up at Bassett. Fill all the way up, because you're not going to see anything for a long time. And this is obvious. This is a storm cellar behind the lock gate, and this is at Liz Vera Cruz's house. If any of you know her, she's a potter that lives in Herman, Nebraska. She has an open house once a year where she hangs great pods and things from the trees in her house, but this is always there, and I like this a lot. This is nice. It has some mystery to it, don't you think? Ted Kuzer's Poetry Repair Shop. Poetry made and repaired. This is in Dwight, Nebraska, which is not too far from Garland. It wasn't open. I waited there patiently with my poems, hoping he would fix them, but no one ever showed up. So there's the poetry shop. There was a bar and a church. That was Dwight, like a lot of the small towns in Nebraska. So yeah, that's all I've got.
And so now, Mary Kay, did you have something you'd like to read as well, or did you want to talk about the Guide to More Nebraska, or I mean the One Book on Nebraska?
I can talk a little bit about it, and then I can do a lead-off poem for the rest of the
I think that's perfect. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Gerry, for asking me to talk a little bit about Nebraska Presents, an anthology of poetry. This is the first year that the Nebraska Library Commission has chosen a book of poetry as the one book, One Nebraska, so it's quite an honor. And we've been going around the streets, well, maybe, the state, doing readings and workshops and celebrating poetry in Nebraska. I'm sorry I'm all hoarse. It's spring and my allergies are blooming. Poetry has such a long, long history in Nebraska. The first published poem was in 1858 in the Nebraska Palladium, a newspaper that came out of Nebraska City. And through the ages, newspapers were a mainstay of early Nebraska poetry. In the beginning, most of it was imported, but as settlers came out and started their own literary clubs, we have a long history of literary clubs here in the state. They put on plays. Some of them were bilingual because for example, the Germans and the English speakers would get together. They were neighbors, and they'd share poetry and plays and stuff. So it's just gratifying to be here years later, and we're still writing and reading and honoring poetry in our state. The passage of time really struck me when Heidi showed the picture of Ted Kuzer's studio and Dwight. My son is getting married May 4th, and he's 28. And I remember when we first went out to visit Ted, and he played in the tree in the backyard, and he was like in 4th grade. So getting a little weepy here. So time passes and poetry stays with us. A German philosopher, Martin Heidegger, talked about poetry as a conversation through time. And it really is. If you read the poems of the past, you learn what was important to them. You learn that what's important to us was also important to them. They had other concerns like where to find water and dig wells, and we probably have concerns that they wouldn't recognize. But the human heart beats through the centuries now. We could almost say centuries here in Nebraska. Well, we can say, darn it, centuries, because the Pawnee, if you read their early ceremonies, they are rich in poetry. They are ceremonial and they are religious, but they just tug at the heart. They have a wonderful poem about for the young people coming into the tribe that the same son used to play on the flute, and it still resonates with appreciation of life and living in our particular region. So we can say we've been writing and reciting poems for centuries. I'm going to start off the reading today, and there are lots of great poets in the audience, but I'll kick off with a poem that is really, I think, when people think of Nebraska, they think of windmills and red barns. And this particular poem is about a red barn. And it's on where I spent my high school years. We lived in Richardson County on a farm. I don't think there's not much in there that needs explanation, except perhaps for ringing the hogs. Someone asked me after I read the poem, how do you ring a hog? Well, there's this little instrument with which you put the ring in the pig's nose so it won't root in your garden or won't root under the fence. So when I say we're ringing the hogs, we're not playing in an orchestra with them. We're making it so that they can't dig their way out of some place that they want to dig their way out or into. Red Barn. See the pegs there, I said and pointed, and the insurance inspector looked. I can't remember what he said, but the wide side door of the barn had rolled open, and I could see 2 pegs holding a beam in place. The red barn color is a particular red. My stepfather worked steadily every day of his life there, keeping up the buildings, barn and corn crib, milk and cob house, cattle shed and chicken coop, the lean-to. Later he poured concrete where the manger had been, where I had milked brony and later chocolate before school, because he thought there was money in hogs. I hear cows stomp for flies, pigs squeal, and this silence. If you want to insure the barn, he says, you have to nail over the corrugated tin. I look up past the loft tight with bales, with the warm, sweet smell of living things all around. And the kitten the barn cat finally had, the one that survived. And the feeding bin full of oats, where the chute was already worn smooth by the time I moved there, to where the owl sat every night like a stone column, his head cocked for field mice. And over there where we rang the hogs and put the Heiffords for shelter during January. The 2 plots of land side by side have passed to my brother and me, and we live each our own 100 miles away and rarely see each other. It's the land that keeps us in touch, and if we don't sell, we will pass to our 4 children, who remember their grandmother as an old woman. They will half remember the stories we force on them, and only then after we're dead and they have buried us. There is not enough corrugated tin, enough to prevent anything from weathering, no insurance with life benefits. The windows look to the east to let in light for the sows when they lay farrowing, overlook the road that took me elsewhere and brings me back home again. Thank you.
All right, this is where I'll tell you that the website is still under construction somewhat. There are 4,367 author records, and we've published about 2,000 of those. And it's taken two years for our staff to do that. So at this point, we're relying on you authors, to help us out. And I'll show you right now. Maybe there's an author who wants to volunteer to read first, and I'll use that as an example. Is there someone who's willing to read first? Hardy? Okay, so we'll go back to Heidi Hermanson, and I'll show you, when I bring up your profiles, it might not have very much information, and I'll show you how you can tell us what we need to add, and how you can do that. And so if you're an author and you're here to read, and we bring up your profile and it doesn't look as complete as it should, then we'll work on that. So let me show you with Heidi's first. So if Heidi wants to add information to what we have right here, she's going to go down to this add information about this author button right here. And this tells you a little bit about what to add and what you can expect. So, for example, it'll tell you that you might, after you send us the information, it might take us a little bit to get it up there, depending on how many author submissions and edits we're receiving. And then it also gives you an email address right here, and that's where you can submit a photograph, for example. You can attach a photograph. I have image permission forms right here for anyone who wants to take one today, but if you submit a photograph, then I'll reply to you and send you a form, ask you to fill it out and return it with your photograph so that we have permission to publish it on the form. But this is where you'll find the space and to edit an author, and then if there's an author here who we don't see on our website, I'll show you what to do in that situation. But we'll start here.
This is a poem from Midwest Quarterly, and it's called At the Star Watching Party. Okay, thank you. Is that better? Every year Valentine has a star watching party. They base the date on the time of the new moon, and tons of people go out and watch. So this is about the time I took my niece and her best friend since the 3rd grade. 1. The sky unrolls from the earth an endless black carpet. The earth rolls by in slow motion like a curveball. We lie on concrete slabs, stars cascade down like a blizzard, the natives slightly amused at the wild-eyed wonder of city folks. We are smaller than we thought, our journey to light simple but arduous. 2. Lewis and Clark used to measure time by distance, and I never quite got that, but I'm beginning to see that as we rocket and ricochet through this wind tunnel of night, time and distance dissipate with equal furiosity as the wild, uncompromising river would. 3. Time and all of its principalities may come to an end, but what about these 2 teenagers and this middle-aged woman breathing in and out gratefully, sailing gracefully in a cardboard box in a riverless river? Beneath us the earth spins, your eyes old as forests. I hand you a piece of the moon, quartered like a pear.
Do we have another volunteer reader? Yeah, okay. Remind me how to, okay.
Leypuldt.
And if you would introduce yourself so
Okay.
that we know from the...
My name is Chuck Leypuldt. I think it's kind of strange that I have to put on reading glasses to read my own stuff. I wrote the book in 2013, I believe it was. 2015, I'm sorry.
We'll look at the book. We can't see the whole scope of the profile here.
Oh,
We'll
yeah.
go down where
You can see all those towns I've lived in. You
There
can
you
blame it on the United Methodist Church because my dad was a preacher and so was I. But I've been in Lincoln for 20-some years. So this story is about a trip that we took to the Gateway Mall about 10 years ago. I have 3 granddaughters, and we were looking after them for the whole week. So they were having their annual lemon days. And one morning we loaded up our van and headed that way. It took a while to find a parking space, and once inside we discovered a few thousand others were shopping along with us. We meandered through the racks of bargain clothing and piles of 1/2 price shoes and perused the shelves of discounted books, which you can't do anymore at the mall, until it was time to head toward the food court. But first, we took a potty break. The food court has many choices, and it seemed the 5 of us went in different directions as we surveyed all the food and drink choices. Grandma supervised Emma and Cora, while Olivia, the 4-year-old, was with me. She and I chose Subway because they had chocolate milk. and they had a pretty long line as well. As we shuffled along and talked about what might go well with chocolate milk, we found ourselves close to the front, and Livy announced it was time for another trip to the toilet. Off we went. And fortunately, the mall has a family lounge, so I didn't have to worry about going into the men's room or standing outside the women's room. It was busy, and we had to endure a line once more. The trip was successful, and we headed back to Subway. By this time, Grandma, Emma, and Cora had their food and were conveniently settled with their trays and packages and were enjoying lunch. After 15 or 20 minutes, Livy and I joined them with our 6-inch subs and chocolate milk. Pretty soon, Emma and Cora were finished. Because there was so much more to see, away they went with Grandma following, and Grandpa remained to supervise Livy's bites of sandwich and sips of milk. But first things first, Emma and Cora needed to visit the necessary room, and Chris said, "Can you clean up this table? And I'm leaving my purse on this chair, so don't leave without it." "No problem," I replied, as I leisurely chewed away on ham and cheese and slurped my favorite cow juice. For a few minutes, I looked around the busy food court, eyeing several other grandparents and casting longer looks at a few young mothers. All the while, I reminded my granddaughter to eat her lunch and drink her milk, and suddenly my precocious little sweetheart announced, "I have to go potty again." And she vanished. Holy buckets! The trays, they can wait. The purse! I had no other choice but to pick it up and head south toward the necessary rooms. I moved as quickly as possible. A 61-year-old man wearing a Wile E. Coyote t-shirt, khaki-colored shorts, black Crocs, and carrying a purse was hurrying toward the restrooms at Lincoln's Gateway Mall. An overweight security guard glanced my way, as did 2 teenagers with coal black and pink streaked hair. No time to waste. My little girl was on the loose. As I entered the restroom hallway, panic set in. I hadn't seen Olivia since she left our table. Surely she went this way, but what if she went to the ladies' restroom to find Chris and the other girls? What to do? Maybe I should holler out her name or stop at the door of the girls' toilets and ask someone to seek out Chris. No, it's been a while. They're probably no longer there. What shall I do? What shall I do? Well, the thing was, Livy had already been to the family lounge twice in the past hour, so I thought I'll check there first. I entered the room. Several young mothers and about a dozen little kids were present and milling around. They all looked at this old guy with the purse. Some stared, others glanced at me, quickly looked away. My grandpa eyes darted around the area but saw no Olivia. At the right moment, an attractive young woman with a little one in a stroller asked me, "Are you looking for a little blonde?" "Yes," I said, reassured. She directed me to a closed door where the familiar child-sized lavatory was. I opened the unlocked door and found my 4-year-old granddaughter comfortably doing her thing and telling me, "Please leave and shut the door. I need my privacy." That's my story.
And I'm also a teacher. I've taught for 27 years, Spanish and English. And for the past 8.5 years, I've written a regular column for the Norfolk Daily News called Novel Thoughts, where I write about books, one book each month and a book-related topic also each month. It comes out the first and third Wednesday of each month. And I have already planned for a while, kind of seeing how today went, this was going to be the topic of my next column, and after being here today, and it definitely will be, so that'll be the first column of May. So and all of my columns are on the website too. So if anybody would like to search for me on Norfolk Daily News, you can find my columns there under, it's called Novel Thoughts. My first novel actually was serialized at the Norfolk Daily News, since I have a relationship there, and they knew me. They went ahead and kind of went along with my crazy idea. I said, I would love somebody to, treat me like Charles Dickens. Would you please serialize my first book? And so they willingly did it, and it was actually pretty successful. And then people kept bugging me all the time. They wanted a copy. Well, I didn't have a copy, because, I've tried for years to get agents, and as many of you know, it's so difficult. So anyway, they did it online, and I went ahead and I did the Amazon, the Kindle, and the CreateSpace too to get copies. So it is available the same way as Chuck's is. So, and I have a few here too if you are interested. This is called The Clearwater House. It is a novel. My roots go back to Clearwater, Nebraska, and so I just set this book there. It's set in Omaha and Clearwater, and the premise is that there's a lady who's an artist, a struggling artist, and kind of like I'm a struggling writer. She's a struggling artist, and she inherits this house in the country. It's an old farmhouse by Clearwater from a woman that she's never heard of. And this woman is still alive, but she has no idea why this woman has given her this house. And she thinks, well, I'll go there and maybe paint and get away from Omaha and get back to my painting roots and take some canvases with me and paint. And while she's in this house, the house sort of speaks to her through these paintings that she creates while she's in the house. And she sees the story of the house that took place years before her. And through the paintings, eventually she ends up realizing why she has the house. So this part I'm going to read to you is from later on in the book. And the people who had lived in the house were a man named Charles and his wife Margaret and their little son Ted. Charles is not a nice guy. And there's a young couple across the way, and Charles has just done something very bad. And so this is the part where the man from across the way, his name is George, comes to confront Charles. Charles headed for the stairs, but was stopped in his tracks by the front door bursting open so violently that the glass pane in it rattled. George came crashing through the doorway carrying a shotgun. The two men locked eyes for a moment that spoke volumes. Charles saw anger, betrayal, hatred, sorrow, and murder in the younger man's blue eyes. George saw only shock on his false friend's face. "You raped my wife," George said hoarsely. "Now, George," Charles began, holding his hands before him in supplication and taking a casual step backwards. "You raped my wife," George repeated louder. "George, listen to, you raped my wife." It was a shout this time. George loaded a round into the barrel. Charles's eyes bulged, and he began to sweat. "Really, George, you raped my wife," George panted, and with each word, he took a step toward Charles, who was now openly backing away and looking around for some sort of weapon. "George, put the gun down and let's talk like reasonable men." George paused for a moment and looked Charles up and down. His eyes narrowed, his lips curled, his nostrils flared. He lowered his chin and glared at his wife's rapist under heavy brows and said very quietly, "You raped my wife." Then he raised the gun. Charles turned and ran for his life. He was still quick and managed to get to the back door before George was prepared to shoot. George ran after him. Charles leaped down the back steps and took off, blindly running toward the trees. George rushed onto the back porch, stopped, calmly took aim at the retreating man, and shot him in the back. The sound of the blast resonated, and in the after effect, a hush fell on the land. The birds were silent, the bugs held their breath, and even the wind ceased its swirling of the leaves. All that could be heard was a gurgle from the mortally wounded man. This was accompanied by the crunching of gravel beneath George's boots as he approached Charles. Despite his wound, Charles was still struggling to rise. George calmly loaded another round, stopped next to Charles, and sent a blast into Charles's head that ended all his struggles. Before the birds, the insects, or even the wind could interrupt the gruesome scene in the lane, another sound intruded. It was the sound of a car approaching on the road. The noise finally punctuated George's fury and snapped him back to reality. As the noise grew louder, Realization of what he'd done crept over him, and his eyes changed from hard slits of revenge to wide-eyed confusion. He turned away from the body, looking for something to hide it with. He knew that the approaching car held Margaret and little Ted. Seeing nothing, and frantic to hide the body from the son's eyes, he tossed his gun into the weeds in the tree line and bent over the dead man. He grabbed the wrists and dragged Charles's body toward the taller weeds, keeping an eye on the bend in the lane. The car was in the lane. He could hear it clearly, but it was idling. He heard a door slam, and then Ted's young voice rose above everything else. "Ready, Ma?" George heard him ask as he continued to drag the dead man faster and faster toward the trees. 1, 2, go! Then he heard the car start forward again. He pulled the body even harder. They were in the weeds, and he crouched down as he successfully slid Charles's body into the taller weeds. He saw Ted appear, running, turning the bend, followed by the car, a smiling and laughing Margaret at the wheel. With one last tug, he and the dead man were within the shadows of the trees. He ducked behind one as the boy and his mother passed nearby. He watched Margaret get out of the car and admit defeat to her speedy son. He saw her turn in his direction and stretch after the long, bumpy car ride. He prayed she wouldn't see the blood on the gravel or the drag marks to the tree line just yet. She slammed the door and went into the house after her son. George stood for a long time under the tree, wondering how best to handle the situation. Finally, he realized he would simply have to tell Margaret the truth. But first, he made his way through the trees and the ditch and went home to check on his wife.
Thank you, Tammy. Anyone want to go next? Ellie? Ellie's probably our youngest author here, and her profile is illustrated. I think she's a great person to go next. Or Sarah? Sarah. Okay.
Hi, I'm Sarah Dale. I have a couple of books that are already in the Heritage Room. We Could Be Heroes is a story about a mom and a daughter and a bunch of dogs living in a Lincoln, Nebraska that is not quite the same as this one and trying to save the world. Collision Course. Closer to the mic. Collision Course is a story about an alcoholic cop who loses her job and inexplicably gets offered a new one, tracking down a mysterious company's tame psychopath who has gone off the rails. I co-wrote this with an author friend in Wales who writes extremely graphic horror, so this one is not for the faint of heart. Something Wicked is the title of my next book, which is coming out on May 19th. And it is young adult in nature. It's the story of 3 Lincoln kids in the summer of 1983 who head out to do a 6 a.m. paper route and end up doing battle for their lives. And that, I believe, is what I'm going to read from, unless you have any crushing desire to hear anything else. My mother is not here, so I can, in fact, read from Collision Course if you want me to. But otherwise, I will start with Something Wicked. This is from the introduction, from the journals of Angie Parsons. I don't really know if I should be doing this, writing everything down. Mr. Rako always said that since not everyone is able to see the evils we battle, being transparent about what we do would turn into a massive legal, moral, and political disaster. I've always agreed with this assessment. I absolutely understand the importance of our work and the chaos that would result if there weren't people like us who were freely able to fight on the front lines. But what about the future? Won't our experiences help the next cuspers or soldiers or whatever they call themselves? As far as I'm concerned, they're going to need all the help they can get. The bad guys, the angry ghosts, the demons, the monsters, they aren't ever going to quit coming at us. So I'm writing it down. I'm compiling the notes and scribbles from my journals into a passably coherent narrative in the hopes that it can be used to help future demon fighters. But I can't pretend that's all of it. This is our story. This was our childhood. These are the things that shaped us, me and Jenny and David, into the adults we became. I don't know if it makes us heroes or crazy or outlaws or what, but it's our story, and it's up to me to tell it. So here goes. My name is Angie Parsons. my best friends were, and always will be, Jennifer Howe and David Owens. The summer before junior high, the three of us were forcibly indoctrinated into a part of our world that stays unseen by most, but not all people. Some of us can see. Some of us can't help but see. We were lucky. Mr. Rako was already looking out for us, and when it happened, he was there to help. He and Jenny's mom, Lorraine, showed us what we could do, helped us learn our strengths. They helped us not only to survive, but taught us how to help other people too. It changed us, of course. We grew up in a secret war zone. We had to face truths other kids didn't. At the same time, we were stuck facing the truths that every kid does. From zits to zombies, even the luckiest kid doesn't get through junior high and high school unscathed. Our job added a little extra life-threatening danger to the whole thing. Okay, maybe a lot. There were plenty of times when we wanted to quit, just back out of the whole mess and be normal. I realize now a whole lot of what I wrote in these journals was my struggle to determine what kind of person I am and why I was making these sometimes spectacularly stupid life choices. The journey isn't over yet, so I can't tell you how it ends, but this is how it begins. I'm going to give you just a little piece here. Okay, no, I'm not. Never mind. But anyway, that one's called Something Wicked. And Ellie and I, my daughter, who will be, I think, speaking next, both work with a little independent publisher out of South Carolina known as Burning Willow Press, and they have been very good to us. So, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Ellie.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'll show you a cool feature of the site right now. One of the things that we want to do with this website is to be able to see authors in connection with each other, whether they're, whether it's a teacher-student or writers who work together. In this case, it's mother-daughter, and I'll show you how to do this. So Sarah is the mother of Ellie Pearsall. And there she is.
So I feel like I'm probably the person in this website that looks the least like I should be on this website. I am 20 years old, and I was published originally when I was 17, which is pretty cool. So my first novel is called Mysterium Excelsium Unium, and it is about a girl named Stella who moves from Louisiana to Nebraska to live with her mom's family after a tragic event. And all of these things start happening to her, and she starts to question everything, and she finds out that she has magic powers. And it all kind of falls apart from there. And then I also have a second one in a series. In this series, I'm intending to write 7, and I am in college, and that's a lot of work. But this is the continuation of that story, and it is the whole original. I like to call them the Scooby Gang, if you guys remember the Scooby-Doo cartoons. The Scooby Gang goes on a summer vacation trip, and they are trapped by a mysterious enemy from the main character's past. I guess my biggest theme that I like to deal with is independence and authority with kids and like people my age. And I think that's probably something that everybody struggles with when they're younger. But especially when kids are not paid attention to, and I feel like one of the things that I try to do is to give a voice to people that are not given enough attention to, and that, they have a voice, and maybe they don't quite know how to use it yet, but they still have opinions, and they still, sometimes they're right. So this is a piece from my first novel, and to just give some background to it, Stella and her friends have encountered this sort of person in this event that is going to be almost catastrophic to the school. And they know all this information, and they try to go and do the right thing and tell the people in power to help us because we need help. And they don't believe them. So here we go. Just follow my lead, guys. I have a plan, I said, rolling my shoulders back. I had no idea if the plan was actually going to work, but it was worth trying. Follow me, the receptionist said, motioning around the front counter. We followed her in a single file line into the principal's office. Hello, everyone. You have urgent news for me? Mr. Jameson asked. He was sitting in his huge black chair behind his desk, seeming smug. Please sit. He had a fairly large office with a desk and bookshelves on one side, and a large table that seated 8 people in the center. We all sat down, the principal at the head of the table and me at the foot. Yes, we have something important to tell you, but I have a deal to make with you first, I said, looking him right in the eyes. He raised his eyebrows at me. And what is this deal? He asked. We have information that we know you need and probably don't have about Walker Achilles and the supply closet in the science wing, I began. His expression became more serious and he leaned forward. The agreement will ensure that after we give you this information, you and all the staff will allow us to help when the event occurs, I said. I was trying to make my voice sound as strong as possible. Me right now. What is this event? He asked. I can't tell you until you agree, I said. I'm not going to agree to anything until you tell me what's going on, he said condescendingly. On the night of this year's prom, Walker and his group of friends are planning to blow up the school. They will use a bomb they've created in the science wing supply closet. They used students with exceptionally strong powers to create it and fuel it, I said, breathing in. I wanted to explain to him exactly what Walker was doing to them, but it was almost too painful to have to say it all again. That's what's in the supply closet, he asked. Yes, as well as the students and most likely Walker and his friends. They're hiding out until prom. Stella Otium, correct? He asked, pointing to me. Yes, that's right, I said disbelievingly. I've dealt with your misbehaviors before, young lady. How do I know you're not lying to me? He asked. I was shocked, to say the least. My misbehaviors have nothing to do with how honest I am, and I can prove it, I said. I was starting to get angry. My cheeks were flushing red and hot. How? Can you open the supply closet and show me all these people down there? He asked. I was speechless. There was a bomb threat in the school, and he didn't believe me. Just because I had done a few stupid things in the past didn't make me a liar or a criminal. Excuse me? Was all I could manage. You've been having lots of problems since moving to the school. I'm not sure I believe you, he said. I swear I can show you, I said. I was so absolutely appalled. I can't open the door because they've locked it. No one can get in except for them. How convenient for your story, he said, starting to look smug again. Stella, let's go. Josh rested his hand on my arm. I can show you, I swear, I said. My eyes were wide. The principal was shaking his head. Everyone began to stand up, but I stayed seated. Students have been going missing, and they were last seen here at school. These students are exceptional with their magic, but they can't control it. They're all in there, I swear. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I have work to do, he said, standing up from the table. No, I can show you, I stuttered. Guys, tell him. Josh pulled me out of the chair. Guys, tears began stinging at my eyes. Stella, come on, Josh said, practically holding me in his arms. Before I could do or say anything more, we were outside in the cool air. No, you have to let me tell him. We have to make him believe us, I shouted. Josh tried to sit me down on a bench, but I moved around him. Do you even understand? I shouted. Tears were streaking down my cheeks. Those kids need us. Who is going to save their lives? I shouted, pointing to the front door. The wind was whipping my hair around my face, and my eyes were blurred with tears, hair, and mascara. Those kids don't know what's going on. Nobody does except for us and Walker. They don't know what those kids are dealing with. Those kids are trapped in a tiny room with a bomb, and people are trying to kill them in a basement, probably without much or even any food or water. They probably miss their families and their homes and their lives. They're trying to kill them. I had to scream over the wind. Stella, calm down, Josh shouted. My friends were all gripping the sides of benches, but I hardly even noticed. I'm not going to calm down. This is a big deal, I shouted. I realized then that I had lowered my center of gravity and things were flying around us, trash cans, plants, even bricks and gravel from the walkways. Stella, Josh shouted. He was up one moment and in front of me the next. He knelt down and wrapped his arms around me. The wind stopped moving, and whatever was in the air fell to the ground. The wind I had created hadn't picked up anything major, but I had certainly made a mess. "It'll be okay. We're going to figure something out," he said. "We're so sorry, Stella. We didn't think we could convince him after he didn't believe you," Leanna said, fixing my hair. "We thought it was over," V said. "This fight isn't over. It's been going on since I got here. I feel like it's my fault. He tried to get me too. I have to help those kids. I could have been there where they are now. And then who would have helped them if I was there? If I had my powers drained and taken from me, if I was there, we would not be as far as we are now. I need to help those kids," I said, tears still streaming down my face. "It's not your fault. It's Walker's. You're trying your hardest to help those kids and everyone else during prom. You care," Dolpha said. I looked around to each of them. Visa and Xavier were pulling leaves and papers from their black hair on one bench. Dolpha was fixing her t-shirt and boots, spitting onto the ground, and Leanna was reaching for her bag that had flown behind a trash can. Even though I caused destruction and chaos in their lives, they still supported me. I looked at all my friends and was thankful that I was already crying because I would have started when I saw them like this. I don't know that I would have friends as good as these people anywhere else. My dad's death has brought me surprisingly good things. I nodded, agreeing. "He doesn't care," I breathed, referring to Walker. "He will care," Josh said. "After prom," I said grimly, "everyone will care."
Thank you, Ellie. Maybe this is a good time to see how many authors are still interested in reading. It's about 3:15, and technically the program goes until 3:30, but this will help us see maybe how much time we need to allow for each author. How many people would like to read still? Just a couple? Okay, Laura? All right, yours is a profile that might need to be updated. So in the case of Laura's profile, we have the basic information up there, but would like to flesh it out a little bit more. So,
hello. Thank you, Charlene, Gerry. Okay, I'm going to read from my new book that just came out. It's called Love, Dad. It's a book of essays. So this is called Love, Dad, and the Dogs. I'm going to start my timer so I don't go over 5 minutes. Okay. Across the table, my phone vibrates. Dad. The day after Christmas, I left Echo with him and his dog for a trip from Nebraska to Acadia National Park for a residency over winter break. Amid the dog snuffling, collar jingling, and tail wagging, my dad waved farewell. Now I read his message. What's going on in Maine? Are you staying in a log cabin? The dogs are fine, and so am I. Love, Dad, and the dogs. I write, then ride my bicycle to the Sundew Trail. On the helipad, 3 parked vehicles hold dogs. A ranger greets me. We're training rescue dogs today. If one runs up to you, don't be alarmed. He doesn't know you're not lost. Once I'm hiking, the forest envelops over tracks of possum, rabbit, and bird, but between the trees, leaves settle like coins. Then a black dog in an orange vest noses me, collar jangling, with such a find. She runs to her ranger. I'm not lost, I whisper as they disappear. In each cove, the tide pulls from the shore. I bike into a freezing grayness of solitude, the unknown state of Maine. In this remote, out-of-way untouchedness, I lock my bicycle to a tree, then hike the footpath to Little Moose Island, where the low tide makes land appear between the water. I collect seashells as I cross the land bridge, then look for rocks. Along with the love of dogs, my dad has cultivated my love of earth, geodes, trilobites, pottery shards. In one photo of me when I was a toddler, I sit on a dinosaur femur. In another, bundled in stocking cap, I hold the handlebars of a tricycle among pawing puppies. I pocket rocks shaped like hearts, then scale boulders. Surf crashes, waves slide between colossal stones. 2 sets of tracks mark the social path, boots and dog prints, and a seal joins my hike. She slips through the rollers, barks vanishing. Then I hike the Scooby Gang head trail to where rocks tumble in the surf. A sign warns against taking such souvenirs away. They plunk as they turn in a meditative song. I heed the warning, thinking of my dad. Daily, my dad drives to my grandpa's. The dogs swirl, fur glinting, sniffing, begging for cookies, and shaking collars in the kitchen light. Even among so many dogs, caring for their aging wasn't mine until Echo. Sometimes Echo still fetches treats, greets visitors, or leans into my hand with recognition. I return from the hike to my dad's new note. Grandpa is grumpy. The dogs are getting along well. Echo is a little restless, looking for you in all the rooms, then plops down and goes to sleep. Love, Dad and the dogs. In the morning, a voicemail flashes. Laura, it's your dad. Call me. It's about Echo. I squeeze the phone hard, finish my work, and then drive to Mount Desert Island to ride at dawn. The park roads climb big hills through mountain forests. The winter humidity surprises. Despite my kit, my fingers chill as my torso sweats. Layers go on, then off. On the port security pier, an enormous seagull perches on a massive pulley. She blinks, then squawks. Pigeons wheel above the wetness. I pause for a drink. Why haven't I returned my dad's call? If Echo was gone, wouldn't I know? Then I ride through Bar Harbor, stopping at overlooks or anywhere along the road where gulls turn, white crests rise, or to spot what lifts into the sky. At Sand Beach, I lock my bike, then high-step through trail slush, leaping over deep pools of melt. Others stamp in bright galoshes behind pedigreed dogs. I slosh my way to where the music of waves touch the beach. Many people walk the surf line, pose in the glitter for selfies, or guide purebreds. A pair of gray-haired walk corgis along the tidal pools. A woman in reindeer pajama bottoms and a stocking cap leads a Labrador. I tried to name the other breeds, but none have the purple tongue or fluff that says chow. The rest of Echo's mix was a guessing game. Spritz, a friend might ask, or German Shepherd? I shrugged. The mix didn't matter. What mattered was Echo's joy. My dad is breathless when I call. Laura, he says, as if hiking uphill, then rushes into a story. He chained Echo outdoors, but she disappeared, leaving only the jingle bell collar behind. The new snow from the storm let him follow her tracks through his yard and neighborhood to the street, but then the tracks stopped. There was no sign of her, he says. I just about lost my mind. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Does anyone else want to read? Yeah, okay. Marie Crone.
This is from my biography of Louise Pound. She was a Lincoln native, and once in a while you'll see something about her in the paper. She was a scholar and an athlete. And so I'm going to not give you any background about myself, but get right into Louise, because I know you're probably all ready to go. I'll give you a paragraph from her college graduation. As Louise raced across the university campus, mastering studies and sports without effort, she perplexed her fellow students. They wondered how one young woman could accomplish so much. She wrote stories, plays, poems, and contributed articles to the Lincoln Journal. With Willa Cather, another fascinating co-ed, Louise edited a literary journal, The Last Sioux. It was short-lived. She led the women's military drill team and took an active role in literary society. Yet she managed to study for a degree in harmony, piano, and sight reading, along with a diploma in English philology. And after classes ended for the day, Louise was a familiar sight riding her bicycle to tennis courts, where she played and won matches with men. In winter, she laced up her skates and cut complicated figures on icy ponds. In addition to taking part in sports and studying, she was a campus leader. And then, as a mature woman, and she's very active in folklore societies and has written many, well, she wrote the only book on folklore in Nebraska that we have to this time. She's speaking at a Texas folklore festival, and she had spoken to these people before. So in getting ready to go, she went out and bought a white picture hat and a white linen suit, assuming that such a group would expect her to appear well-dressed. Okay, I've told you that. When the hour of her speech arrived, Louise was so confident of her listeners' interest that she marched to the lectern without looking at the audience. After arranging her material on the podium, she gave the room an appraising glance, and she was shocked to see only a few white faces. A tribe of Cherokee Indians wrapped in blankets and holding papooses in their laps, along with African Americans, had been invited to attend the festival. As the audience gazed solemnly at Louise, she realized that her picture hat and white silk suit were out of place, and that the paper she planned to read would be meaningless to the listeners. Scanning the sea of red and brown faces again, she recognized Jean Thomas of Ashland, Kentucky, and called her to speak. Thomas, an author, lecturer, and folk festival promoter, was used to speaking to mixed racial groups. Her extemporaneous address pleased the audience and saved them from a boring experience. Louise's tactful handling of the Dallas episode reflected her integrity and practicality, qualities that she had absorbed from her parents' teaching and example. This was published by American Legacy Media Historical Press in Utah. I've written other books, but they're all listed somewhere.
Thank you, Marie. Anyone else? Karen, did you have any notes you want to make about the website or anything I should point out specifically? I'll just point out one search feature, and then I'll let you guys ask questions if you want. I know it's the first sunny day in a couple months, and we've been here for an hour and a half, so certainly don't expect anyone to stay for questions. But if you do have any questions, we can show you on any of these computers after the show, or after the program. But I will show you one of the ways that you can search. So if you're just interested in looking at, who's out there, who are the Nebraska authors who have written or who are writing, this browse page is a great place to see just some names you might not recognize. Anytime you refresh your browser, new names will come up, and so you can just refresh or click browse, and you'll see some of the more important Nebraska authors from this screen. And you can also search if you just want to see Nebraska authors who write fiction, or journalists, or an author's name begins with the letter A. These are good ways to just to browse the database. Or maybe you just want to see Nebraska authors who were the early Nebraska authors. There are only two from the beginning of the 19th century. But you can isolate your if you don't want to do a specific search, you can isolate your authors in these ways, or just browse in these ways. So For example, last year we were looking for people who we wanted to honor any recent deaths, Nebraska authors who had died in the last year. So maybe you want to search for a death date of, the last, or a date range in the last couple years. And that's a way to do it. But the search screen is where you can find more specific information. So for example, I'm going to search for Ames readers right now so we can see who has been part of this program in the past. The easiest way to do it is to search all fields here, and I'm just going to type in Ames. I think that will bring up more than we need, but so it brings up 146 records and a list of all the names of people who have Ames somewhere in their record. And that might mean that they're an Ames reader, or maybe it's an Ames reader, maybe Louise Pound would show up because your Ames reading discussed Louise Pound, for example. And so, so this doesn't tell you what Ames means in there, but if you want to know who was an Ames reader, you would search in a specific field. We consider it an honor to be a part of the Ames reading program, so we put Ames readers in the honor field. So right here are the fields, and you would click on honors and search just for Ames within the honors field, and you will see a little bit smaller list of people, but these are all people who've been in the Ames reading before. So for example, Lucy Adkins, I see in the very first row here. We can pull Lucy up, and there's Lucy's profile, and we can see that she was Ames reader in 2001, 2004, and 2013. So this is just one of the search features, and if there's anything, if you guys have any specific features that you want to look for, I can show you how to do that, but that's just an example. So does anyone have any questions before we go, or should we call it? All right, well, thank you all for being here. Thanks to our readers, and congratulations on your great book and great program.